People define us as kind of a purple state. I don't necessarily describe us that way. I'd say we're more red around the outside, blue in the center. This cycle, more than last, I hear a lot about kind of the big tent, bringing folks back, because we've had a lot of Republicans leave the party and we've had a lot of people come into the party. I think our registration numbers are actually up at this current time.
Obviously, we've seen Trump at the top of the ticket. That's had an impact on these states. And then some of these similar type candidates that have run for office statewide. You mentioned Cary Lake, for example.
Probably the hottest issues on the ballot. We have an abortion issue. We have one related to the border. We have ranked choice voting on this ballot.
What would you assess would be the one issue, regardless of who wins, whether it's Trump or Harris? What's the one issue that would determine that top of the ticket from your vantage point? I'm Joel Payne.
I'm Leslie Sanchez.
And welcome to Crosstalk Politics. Leslie and I are going to dig into the hottest battlegrounds across the country that are going to be consequential to the 2024 election.
And it's also a conversation that we would want to have with any of our friends, a deeper dive into what really matters, what's happening on the ground, and the things that I feel voters really want to understand better, at least we do.
We're going to treat everyone with respect, and you're going to get our honest take on what's happening. And we're always going to be civil and respectful to each other. You can count on that from Crosstalk Politics. Stay tuned on YouTube and everywhere you can get podcasts to watch and listen to Crosstalk Politics, and make sure to rate, subscribe, review. Tell our friends about us. Like us on all your favorite social media apps. We know that there's been a lot of talk about all the battleground states across the country. There might be no hotter battleground than what is going on in the desert Southwest in Arizona. And Leslie and I decided that now's as good a time as any to go and dive deep on what's happening out in Arizona by talking to a candidate who's on the ballot and who understands the issues that are affecting Arizona communities every day and what will be determinative in terms of how Arizona goes in 2024.
We're very excited today that we have an opportunity to have Arizona Corporation Commissioner Leah Marquez Peterson. She is someone who is on the statewide ballot running for election again. And as a commissioner, she's responsible for electric, water, gas, wastewater industries, really big in the state. And as an elected official, she gives us her honest viewpoint of what's changed during these races, but also she comes at it from a business perspective. She was the president and CEO of the Tucson Hispanic Chamber from 2009 until November of 2018. She's received numerous leadership awards, and she's had several businesses that really give her an idea what is going on, especially on the Arizona border.
Yeah, well, thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Joel. It's nice to meet you, and excited to see you again, Leslie. I've lived in Arizona almost my entire life, with a little stint in California, like many of us, but I have been active in politics and advocacy and small business since I turned 18. And I'll start by just kind of setting my perspective. I come from a family, multi-generational small business owners from Southeast Arizona, which is the mining communities of Clifton and Morenci, kind of near the border of New Mexico. So having had a family that had small business principles at heart, running tortilla factories, Mexican restaurants, turquoise shops, insurance agencies, those kind of businesses, we've always paid attention to issues and policies that impact our business community. And that's really what led me to lead the Tucson Hispanic Chamber many years later when I met you, Leslie, and advocate on behalf of we had about 1,500 members in that chamber that were all along southern Arizona and some in northern Mexico. In Arizona now, I think so many issues right now that we are considered one of the hot states everybody's watching. People define us as kind of a purple state. I don't necessarily describe us that way. I'd say we're more red around the outside, blue in the center, if that makes sense. Some of our most populated areas of Flagstaff, Phoenix, and Tucson, inner city locations are more Democrat, with our rural and more suburban areas being more Republican. I grew up in Tucson, which is in southern Arizona, and which is predominantly Democrat. I grew up as a Republican, again, since I was 18, and a mixed family politically, which we can also talk about, which is interesting. But I think the top issues we're hearing here are about the border. We've got all the politicians flying out to the border to either see it for the first time or to visit it again or take photos. We've got a hot abortion issue here now that we are debating and have a proposition on our ballot. There's a lot about cost of living and inflation. I mean, so all the hot button items you're hearing at the national level, we're certainly here on the ground floor in Arizona focused on that.
Well, one, Leah, I'll just repeat Leslie's welcome to you, and thank you so much for joining us. I want to pick up on something that you said just in describing the state. I think that was such a wise way to describe it, that it's not a purple state, but it's red on the outside with blue in the middle. My orientation to Arizona has always been the fierce independent streak throughout the state. The way I've always been oriented is that about a third of the state is Democrat, about a third of the state is Republican, and about a third is independent. I imagine that may have shifted in recent political election cycles, but that feels like such the current that runs through the state, that there's this fierce independent streak. And it feels like I'll just maybe focus on the Republican Party in the state for a second. It feels like there is a shift that's in progress that has not been completed within the Republican Party. The kind of John McCain, John Kyle era of the Republican Party in the state, to where it is now, where you have dominant figures like a Cary Lake and folks like that who are maybe a little bit more MAGA. I'm just curious about kind of your take on that, kind of the journey that the state politics have been on, and particularly the state Republican Party has been enduring.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think any of us have quite figured it out yet, but I would say yes, absolutely. We are seeing a lot of change within the party, certainly during my adult life as I've been involved in politics. It's very divisive. We're right this cycle, because I've now run in the last 3 cycles, which I can kind of talk about the difference if you'd like later. But this cycle, I hear a lot of conversation around unity and working together and voting the ticket. As a candidate, our party's been very good at creating these golden tickets, we call it, where they list all the Republican candidates and put the websites on them and get those out. And you see a lot of that distribution happening, a lot of knocking on doors. So I think we're really trying to bring the party back together. This cycle, more than last, I hear a lot about kind of the big tent, bringing folks back, because we've had a lot of Republicans leave the party. And we've had a lot of people come into the party. I think our registration numbers are actually up at this current time. But just a lot of flux. And it's hard to be in a room of people that believe, in the Republican platform generalities, and just to have so much challenge and maybe combative nature. I think that's a little less at this moment in time, but it's been quite a journey in Arizona.
Obviously, we've seen Trump at the top of the ticket. That's had an impact on these states. And then some of these similar type candidates that have run for office statewide. You mentioned Cary Lake, for example. Did you see that fissure in 2020? So 2020, Biden wins. And a lot of people didn't expect that. Very small numbers, first time since 1996. Was that kind of rip in the Republican Party already there? And is that where you're seeing, people left and decided not to come back? Or it was replaced by a new, different type of working class, maybe unaffiliated voter?
I think a lot of that divisiveness really peaked, I'd say, in the 2020 election. We had longtime Republicans who were elected leaders that were censored by the party. We really had a distinction between MAGA and non-MAGA, and maybe a lot of judgment in that regard on where you stood on different issues. Fast forward to now, and I think we're doing a better job at unifying. We're not there yet, though. There's still a lot of people that have left the party or have left politics altogether. I think we have groups in our state that are focused on ballot chasing, they're calling it, which is smart. It's going to people who used to be high propensity voters, but have now sat out and thought, forget this, this is too crazy, I'm not going to participate. Large groups of people they're now knocking on doors and talking about issues and why it's so important to vote, and that every voice matters. We also saw in the last election cycle, people lose by less than 100 votes, right? Some major races. I think our attorney general race was within 300 votes. We've had a recent congressional seat in a primary. I think that was 40 votes or something crazy. So it really, I think, stresses how important every voice, every vote is. And I think you see both parties really focused on that.
I know we want to talk more down ballot in a second. I have maybe one more question, just kind of broader, big picture, kind of top of the ticket. If you had to assess, like, there's one issue that's going to decide what happens in Arizona this election cycle, whether it's cost of living, economy, foreign policy, whatever you feel like it might be, what would you assess would be the one issue, regardless of who wins, whether it's Trump or Harris? What's the one issue that would determine that top of the ticket from your vantage point?
I think it's going to be cost of living, whether people want to define that as inflation or cost of gasoline, or in my case, utilities. I think people are really concerned with affordability. That things are really tightened up. There's a lot of demands on our dollars, and we've seen the cost of everything go up, whether it's steel and concrete and lumber, and affecting affordable housing in the state, or the impact to our utility industry as they're trying to grow their infrastructure and support the energy grid, which is what I do at the commission, and how those costs of supplies have also gone up, or just the grocery store prices. That's what I hear the most. I'm campaigning statewide now, as Leslie mentioned, and so I'm in every corner of the state, whether it's rural or urban or whatever it may look like. And everybody's talking about the cost of goods and services. And I think that's really going to be a deciding factor.
It's interesting. I think of the late John McCain. I mean, we can't it's such a prominent figure in the party, leader in the party. And he understood how to kind of talk to all parts of the state on a variety of different issues and bring people together, especially on the area. Let's move into it, a border. And immigration. He was very much about kind of finding a comprehensive solution, and was ostracized by many in the conservative wing of our party, because he was looking for a compassionate approach to that. Those kind of messages are gone. You don't hear about it. Can you talk about how the border, and then we had this big visit, drawing a lot of attention to the Arizona border. Texas gets a lot of attention on that. How is Arizona different, and the relationship with Mexico, the relationship of commerce and goods, and just the people, how they are responding, people that live along the border?
Yeah, I think if I compare it to the 2020 dialogue that occurred, that was primarily around a border wall, right? That's what President Trump was running on in the time. Those were the talking points. Fast forward to now, I think it's a much more comprehensive conversation occurring. I hear candidates, I hear current elected officials like Congressman Siscomani, who handles a lot of the border in CD6, talk about not just border security, but technology needed, the importance of international trade with Mexico, because they're one of our largest trading partners, the relationships we have, the importance of, reforming visa status and workforce. And I mean, there's so many different components to it, as we know, but sometimes it just gets stuck in the talking point. Are you for or against the wall? That's the whole position. And that's not the case. We need a much more comprehensive approach to that. I do remember when Senator McCain, and I think it was Senator Flake and others, put together their comprehensive border package. And at the time I was at the Hispanic Chamber, and we advocated for it, and we're trying to have conversations and so on. We haven't seen anything like that level at this point, but there are a lot of conversations occurring. And I think they're, instead of trying to pass the whole enchilada, as we talk about it, break it into little bites and take steps on different smaller bills, I think there's been some success, but I think absolutely for Arizona, that's a key issue, especially I think in Republican rooms. They want to know that something's going to be done. The other issue that I would bring up is we have a lot of homeless people, a lot of unhoused, or however you want to describe them, especially in the core of Tucson and Phoenix. I've gone to meetings recently and lots of conversations around leadership groups, tying it all to fentanyl, mental illness. So if we back into that, how is so much fentanyl ending up in Arizona? A lot of people point at the border. So, I mean, a lot of it comes back to what controls are we going to put in place, because we're seeing it on the streets in downtown Phoenix. Maybe
one more just question writ large. A thing I've noticed from the outside looking in on the state is the outcome of the 2020 election, and who believes who won the 2020 election in the state feels like it was a very significant issue, obviously in 2020 and even 2022 and beyond. Do you feel like that kind of still hangs over the state, or are you're somebody who is obviously in every community in the state as you're campaigning? Do you feel like that is still a resonant issue, or do you feel like a lot of Arizonans have moved beyond the talk of what happened in 2020?
And that's a good question. I'd say in this current cycle, people have seen the lawsuits that have occurred over the last many years, heard a lot of the conversations and talk about the election being stolen and so on. I think they've moved beyond that. What I hear when I'm in Republican clubs and legislative districts and all the rooms that I'm in is the fact that ballots are mailed tomorrow in Arizona. They will arrive in your home. Don't sit on them. Don't leave it on the coffee table. If you don't trust the mail, because there's a lot of concern with just dropping it back in the mail, then drive it to a voting center, put it in the box yourself. We've had a lot of errors in Arizona in our 15 different counties, lots of challenges that cause people to really have great concern. But we're not asked as much as candidates, was the election stolen? We're asked, are you going to trust the results of this upcoming election? I'm going to trust the results. I mean, what else can I do? I'm not running for Secretary of State or county recorder to fix this. So we've had a lot of microscopes looking at every different facet and had a lot of folks that are volunteering time to watch the system. I think we've hopefully moved beyond that conversation and really focused on getting people to vote, because you don't want people discouraged thinking, why even vote? My ballot will never make it, or whatever it may be. So we're hoping to get beyond that conversation.
I love that part because we want to get beyond that, but I feel like in Washington, at least that's all the talk is, that gets raised constantly, and it's going to be a big factor. You're talking about depressing the vote, which is interesting. Have you seen any ads, and they're in Spanish language or social or something that's saying, your vote counts, or not so much the get out the vote as much as being fearful your vote may not count?
I see positive ads or conversations saying your vote matters, and with pointing to different races where they've been so close, as I mentioned before. Interestingly, I just participated in an event called Arizona Storyteller that was put on by the Arizona Republic, our largest newspaper in Phoenix. And it was not political per se, but it was about civic engagement, how your vote, your voice matters. It was done in bilingual. So people told their personal stories about what makes a difference. And I told stories in that session, because I was one of the storytellers, about sitting at the chamber office and hearing from small business owners who would say, I'm having problems with graffiti or retail crime or whatever it may be, but I don't know who to talk to. I feel powerless. What can I do? And just how I would respond to them at the time as a chamber president about how important it was that they had a voice and what steps they could take. We need to have more of those conversations throughout the nation, much less Arizona.
Why don't you transition a bit? I know our time is limited, so want to hit a couple of other topics, Leslie. I think in particular, we wanted to talk about one of the congressional districts in the state that we know will be hotly contested. It's the 6th congressional district. Forgive me, Leah, if I got that wrong, but I think it's the 6th, with Juan Ciscomani as the incumbent. And we know that Juan Ciscomani is one of the, I think, a dozen or so Republicans around the country who won in districts that President Biden won in 2020. So that makes it the purplest of purple districts by how the prognosticators determine it. I'd be kind of curious as your on the ground perspective about less about how that race is looking. I think the prognosticators can determine that, but just what has that looked like locally? Has there been a current of spending? Have the issues there, do they look the same as they look around the rest of the state?
Yeah, so I live in CD6. And interesting point too, I ran for Congress years ago in that same district. It looked a little different, but so I certainly am familiar with the area. We have seen millions and millions. I don't know the total, but on both sides, the national parties paying attention. Once a congressman or congresswoman is in space, their most vulnerable time is after that first term. And that's where Congressman Ciscomani is at now. So he's got his opponent from the last cycle, Kirsten Engel, who is running against him. We are flooded in direct mail pieces and TV and all the digital media angles that folks go at. I don't know how it compares to other districts, but it feels like there's a lot of money being spent in CD6.
If it feels like it, it's probably true.
Yeah.
Especially those direct mail pieces that come in. Is there a lot more bilingual? Do you see more Spanish?
I do. Interestingly, I see things that are in Spanglish and then in Spanish. Congressman Siscomani is bilingual, so I think he's got that kind of leg up on doing the different Spanish media stations and so on. I think he's the first Mexican immigrant to serve, or something. I have to look at that statistic, but just very interesting background. And I haven't seen Spanish yet from the Ingle campaign, but I'm sure she's doing that too.
By the way, the listeners will notice I opened my door because my dog was begging to get downstairs.
He wants to be on, Joel. Bring him
I thought he
in.
wanted to be on, and he was loving this riveting conversation we're having, but he wanted to be downstairs. And that's great to know that you live in that district, and I'm sure, like a lot of people around the country, you're getting bombarded with ads. So we apologize from the rest of the country for how much spending is happening there. I'm also curious about kind of the governor's race, but I think more particularly, look, one of the most fascinating figures in Arizona politics that gets a lot of national attention is Cary Lake. She is the Republican running for governor. She ran in the Senate race a few years ago unsuccessfully. She's a former TV anchor. In many ways, kind of comes from central casting. I always say Arizona candidates. One thing I've just known as a kind of a political hack is that Arizona tends to find these candidates from central casting, whether it's John McCain or Mark Kelly or even a Cary Lake, right? These folks they kind of just look like, like the perfect candidate. Anyways, that race against Ruben Gallego for the Senate seat, I'd be kind of just curious about your take about how that race is going. Obviously, Ruben Gallego, very known around the state as a member of Congress, formerly married to the mayor of Phoenix, a veteran. That race is obviously hotly contested. Curious about kind of your orientation of that race as well.
So I certainly see Ruben Gallego, our current congressman, and Cary Lake all around the state. I think you turn on a TV in Phoenix and it's nonstop in Cary Lake commercials. I think a lot more than she has at this point, but she's really relying on Republican national supporters, I think, to step forward and help her with this race. She ran to the right, and it's so how do you win this purple state, or wild, wild west, as we call it in Arizona? And so it's interesting to see the conversation or the talking points she's using. And I've heard her speak many times because I'm often in the same room speaking next or to Republican crowds. So I think she's getting around quite a bit all around the state, and that's what you need to do in Arizona. Get in the car and get out there to every community to talk to the folks and hear their feedback. So it'll be the top race to watch, I think, in Arizona.
Yeah, and Leslie, before you go, I'll just say I think that's so fascinating how you describe it as kind of the national, like there's a national current of kind of Republican energy that's behind her. I think that's a really smart way to capsulize that.
It's behind her, Joel, but let's be honest, she's behind. I mean, and I know you're not crowing about that, and I appreciate that on that part. But there is a distinction between where the top of the ticket is and where our Republican candidate is. And that's a challenge in some other states like Nevada and some of these other hotly contested Senate races. Those tickets not lining up. I wanted to talk in our short time, Leah, one of the things you mentioned were all of these ballot initiatives and how they're impacting the race going forward. And one of the questions we like to ask is, what will you be watching election night? That's your barometer for how the state is falling. I had previously asked Leah this question, Joel, so you know, and it was this cross pressure between ballots and the impact those are going to have, along with, kind of riding the wave of this unconventional national election. And if you could speak a little bit to that, I think that would help unpack what Arizona is really lining up to be.
Yeah, that's a great question, Leslie. And I'll kind of set the stage that we have a Republican majority in our House, in our state legislature, and a Democrat governor. And so that have not quite gotten along, seen a lot of vetoes and so on bills. So I think the strategy from the state legislature was to put a lot of these key initiatives just on the ballot, let the citizens decide. So we have 13 ballot propositions on our ballot. It's a 4-pager. So that's, 2 sides. That's a lot to expect voters to go through and not to get ballot fatigue, as it's called. And very worried about all those lower on our ballot, the down ballot candidates, that they get support and that all these ballot propositions are handled. Probably the hottest issues on the ballot, we have an abortion issue. We have one related to the border. We have ranked choice voting on this ballot, among many other things. For me, I'm really going to be watching the ranked choice voting. I've seen, hybrid or different styles of that in Alaska, in California. I mean, you guys, I'm certainly have seen it as national political leaders, and I'm not sure what kind of impact that'll have on Arizona. We talked earlier about kind of had a divided Republican Party. But I know as a statewide Republican candidate, I really have relied on my team, as I'll call it, right, to help me, especially because I'm a clean elections candidate, which in our state means we collect $5 donations from 1,500 people in order to receive state funding to run. And long story, we do that because we had our utilities get involved in the races in the past and there was corruption and so on. So this is important as a commissioner. But what does ranked choice voting mean, and how is the structure of a political campaign different if we don't have that team to rely on? How much will it affect that? I do hear of Alaska and other states rolling back some of those issues, or trying to through their own initiatives. So that's particularly interesting to me. I think the abortion proposition is the one that they're really trying to have that emotional appeal to get people out to vote. We'll see. We've had, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of petition gatherers throughout the state for quite a long time, collecting those petition signatures. And I think they turned in some 600,000 signatures. So it was huge. So we've all been hearing the issue quite a bit, but there are so many important issues in these ballot propositions. I think we're all going to be watching to see who cares enough to read through it, who understands that a yes may mean a no may mean a yes. I mean, that's always very complicated. But I think for me personally, it's probably ranked choice voting I'm going to be watching. That
point about ranked choice voting, I mean, I would imagine for someone like yourself who you are not someone who is a fire breather, right? Regardless of your party, and every orientation I've had to ranked choice voting is it supports serious candidates. It kind of demurs to folks who try to build broad coalitions, who try to bring people together. And I imagine in a state like Arizona, you are someone who would, potentially, kind of see like the difference in how you would have to go about putting together a coalition if you had ranked choice voting versus you didn't. I think that's really interesting. I don't know if you have any more perspective on that.
Well, I'll add, I mean, my race is different because there are 3 seats open, so 3 people move forward. So it's kind of a little bit like ranked choice voting in that regard. But for many of the other races, I worry if I have friends and family and former chamber members approach me now saying, I don't know anyone on this ballot, tell me about the judges, explain to me the constables, who's running for this. So if we aren't having that very distinct R&D and one person moves forward and you're expecting the voters to do a lot more research and a thorough understanding of everyone in order to be able to choose or rank choice the folks on the ballot, I worry folks won't engage. I don't know. I mean, all we have to look at is those states that have passed this in the past. If it does pass, I'm going to clearly educate myself as quickly as possible and do all I can to communicate to people how important it is to watch. We, as candidates, we do candidate debates or forums, right, all across the nation. In Arizona, it's been hit or miss. Not all the candidates show up. Not everyone participates. I mean, those will be even more important. And I've always found that they're very important. I try to go to everyone I possibly can who will host one for us on the commission. But that'll be even more important if you're having to rank choice vote, a bunch of folks on a list that you've never heard of.
It's so true, Joel. And, you've seen those ballot initiatives where I think I'm on the point where a no means a yes. Especially on taxes, like raise it 1 cent for a bond, but you're like, is that a yes or is that a no? And it sounds like these are just as complex, and explaining them to, just such a broad population in a short amount of time, it's going to make an impact on this race. And that ballot fatigue you talk about, what if you just were to, finger in the wind and kind of pick which way ballot fatigue would have an impact? What do you think that would mean down ballot?
I think with the millions of dollars being spent on the presidential race and the Senate race, and maybe a couple of the congressional races, people will vote for that and may just leave the rest. I mean, that's my greatest fear, is they just like, okay, I don't know the rest of these people and these are too complicated. I'm going to vote because it's my duty, but I don't know if they're going to go down ballot. So interestingly, for my own parents who were like, okay, Mija, tell me about all these different ballot propositions. What do these mean? I was trying to find a source that wasn't totally biased, and we get a lot of pamphlets in the mail. So I picked a couple of them, gave them to my parents, and said, "Okay, I flagged all the pages. Start doing your research." And I mean, that's what the voters are going to have to do in our state with so many ballot propositions, and that doesn't even count what's happening locally in your community. If your school is passing a bond, or community college is looking for some kind of initiative. So this is quite a packet folks are going to be mailed out tomorrow in Arizona.
Leslie, I know we promised to give Leah some of her day back here, so we'll maybe wrap with one final question from each of us. I'll start with one for myself. Something we did not talk a lot about here, Leah, is the switch that happened in July between Joe Biden to Kamala Harris as the candidate at the top of the Democratic ticket. And obviously that has ramifications for how Arizona is going to go in the presidential electoral college race. But I'm curious about the down ballot impact that had. Did you notice any change with how voters and how candidates were kind of existing kind of in a Joe Biden at the top of the ticket world versus a Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket world? I'm curious kind of from your perspective, how you experienced that.
Yeah, that's as I think through that. No, I didn't notice a change. I mean, I think those couple of weeks where we didn't know what President Biden was going to do, and there was so much uncertainty, and then Vice President Harris was named. I mean, she didn't, from my perspective, have a good reputation in Arizona with her support for her interest and her intention around the border, and we didn't really see a lot of activity occur. So she had a lot to overcome in Arizona. Interestingly, right before I jumped on this with you on the podcast, I was reading the local news, and we have so many folks coming to Arizona right now to campaign, between her husband, Vice President Harris herself. We've got JD Vance in Tucson, I think tomorrow or Wednesday, Steve Scalise. I mean, just on and on. Everybody's coming to Arizona right now to campaign. So I think she's come a long way. I don't know the polling data, but in terms of folks understanding her perspective, but I didn't really see an impact down ballot. I think folks were, especially Democrat candidates, just really focused on their own race and realized that there's a lot of turmoil or chaos going on at the national level. Let's just focus on our own race. That's what I've done in the case of my statewide election is, regardless of who's running for whatever, I'm just going to focus on what I can provide as a corporation commissioner and answer those questions and not try to stray into all the other areas that I won't ever vote on.
That is well said from our special guest, Leah Marquez Peterson, an Arizona Corporation Commissioner. We should have called you Commissioner Marquez Peterson through the whole thing. Thank you for letting us be a little more collegial in our conversation. But it's really outstanding. And Joel, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else. I did want to add that Tony Gonzalez, Congressman Tony Gonzalez, Texas 23, represents a big part of the U.S.-Mexico border. The Texas swing district, in many cases, was in your area recently as well. And with NRCC, the Republican campaign committees are putting dollars. So I think on both sides of the aisle, a lot of visitors that you probably will not see again for the next couple of years. But Arizona is that important.
Yeah, and Leslie is correct to correct us, Commissioner. Thank you for letting us be more candid with you. We appreciate it.
Leah is fine. No, and it was really an honor to be on your show. Thank you so much for having me and for paying so much attention to Arizona. We really appreciate it.
We're grateful for your service, and we're grateful for your observations and your expertise here. And thank you to all for joining us for our latest episode of Crosstalk Politics with Joel Payne and Leslie Sanchez. Stay tuned for more from this channel. Thank you.